So today I'm going to explain how to write a formal letter. Now, writing a formal letter is not particularly difficult, but there are some things that you should take into consideration when you're writing your formal letter. And one of the things you should definitely take into consideration is how you actually write in formal English. So before we can talk about how to actually write a formal email or letter, we need to talk about the differences between a formal email or letter and an informal email or letter. Now, an informal letter is something that you write to your friends or your family, just a friend or an acquaintance you can talk to in an informal style. A formal letter or email is something that you write to your teachers, or maybe when applying for a job or writing a letter of complaint, or when you work as a lawyer and you need to contact lots of your clients, then you're writing formal emails or letters. Now, as you might have noticed, there is of course a difference between a formal email and a formal letter, but the difference is mostly in its layout. The content just remains the same. Now, as is always the case with writing in formal English, there's always a scale of formality. Some things should be very formal and some things can be less formal and just a bit more semi-formal. Now, what you do and which level of formality you choose depends on what you're actually writing. When you're writing a letter of complaint, you definitely want to stay very formal. But when you're applying for a job, you also want to be a bit less formal, because you want to put some feeling in there as well. But whatever level of formality you choose, there are some things you definitely shouldn't do when you're writing a formal email. So stay till the end so you know what these things are. So you now want to know what the layout is of a formal letter. Now, I'm going to explain a standard British style formal letter, and you can download an example in the description below. Now, a formal letter always consists of the following parts. We have my own address without my name. Then we get the date, which you can write in any of these following ways. Then you get the address of the addressee, and if you know the person to whom you're writing, you might want to put their name here as well. Then you get your salutation. And you can either choose Dear Sir, Madam, or you can address someone with their name, and then you use Dear Mr., Dear Mrs., or Dear Doctor, Professor, or whatever other title this person might have. Now, it is important to remember that based on the salutation that you choose, you might need to use a different ending. If you start your letter with Dear Sir, Madam, you need to end your letter with Yours faithfully. But if you start your letter with Dear Mr. or Mrs., you need to end your letter with Yours sincerely. After your salutation, you get the body of your letter, and you always start with your reason of writing. Then, after your reason of writing, you get your information, or the thing that you're actually writing the letter for. After a few paragraphs that contain your information, you want to end your letter. At the end, you sometimes want to repeat the solution you're looking for. But whatever you do, make sure that you end with something like, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Afterwards, you get your ending, like Yours faithfully or Yours sincerely, depending on how you started your letter. You leave some room for your signature if you're writing a letter, or just some room if you're writing an email, and then you end with your name. So in your paragraph stating your reason of writing, you want to start with something like, I'm writing you regarding whatever you're writing for. So it might be, I'm writing you regarding the open application on your website, or I'm writing you regarding my order placed on that and that date. Or it might be something like, I'm writing you regarding the fracas that took place on the 5th of January. Now, instead of saying I'm writing you regarding, you could also say something like I'm writing to, and then you can include one of the following verbs or any other verb that carries the same meaning. So you can get something like I'm writing to complain, I'm writing to inform, I'm writing to congratulate, or I'm writing to request something. In the remainder of your reason of writing, you want to include information from previous correspondence. So if you're writing to someone who has already written to you, you want to include what the person said in that previous letter or email. Now, the reason of writing is very important, because remember, people who are reading formal emails probably get lots of emails and letters throughout the day, and knowing what your letter is about will definitely help them when they're reading your letter. Now, another thing you should definitely take into consideration when you're writing your formal letter is that the paragraphs are structured. You want to make sure that your paragraphs cover one thing so that the person reading your letter or email doesn't need to figure out what you're talking about. You might want to use a standard paragraph layout, or you want to look at good examples and evidence for the things that you're writing about. Now, here are the things you definitely shouldn't do when writing a formal letter. First of all, don't use contractions. Contractions are certain versions of words that are kind of two words put together, like couldn't and don't and I'm. You want to avoid saying these things, so you should say could not, do not, and I am. This definitely increases your formality. Another thing you definitely don't want to use when you're writing a formal letter is using idioms. Idioms can be very nice to read and can be beneficial for your message. But remember, we are trying to be formal here, and using idioms kind of makes your letter a bit informal. And I think the most important thing you shouldn't do when writing a formal letter is that you don't want to use slang or street language or informal language. And these include swear words and other weird constructions that you might use in informal language, and you might use them in spoken language, but you shouldn't use them when writing a formal email. Using slang and using swear words is not only very impolite, it also shows that you're not able to use the language in a professional way, and I don't think that's something you want to convey to the reader of your message. Now, after those negative don'ts, let's look at some positive do's and things you definitely should do when you're writing your formal letter. So the first thing you can do when writing a formal letter is using the passive. And using passive voice is very useful because it increases formality and it increases the distance between the reader and the writer. Then, you want to write as clearly as possible, and you want to avoid redundant language. Redundant information is already unnecessary, but redundant language is also unnecessary. You want to avoid wordy sentences and sentences with words that don't say anything. Then it's also very important that you remain as polite as possible. When you're writing a formal email, there is a chance that you're writing to someone you don't know. And it is very important to be polite when you're writing to someone for the first time, even when you're writing a letter of complaint. Because in the end, you want something from the person that you're writing to. And if you start being impolite, the person might not feel the need to help you and it doesn't solve your problem. Finally, if you want to improve the level of your letter, you might want to look for certain synonyms. And using a thesaurus is definitely the way to go. So that's basically it when it comes to writing a formal letter. If you found this video useful, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comment section why you're here and why you're writing your formal letter. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next Writing Essentials videos.